This season is brought to you by Plugra Premium European-style butter, made using a slow churn process. Look for Plugra wherever fine butters are sold.
I think this is really a branding issue. I think white chocolate has a big branding problem in the fact that it has chocolate in the name. From King Arthur Baking Company, this is Things Bakers Know. I'm David Tamarkin, King Arthur's editorial director.
And I'm Jessica Badalona, staff editor at King Arthur Baking. And today we are diving into a topic that's a personal passion of mine, which is chocolate. David, I'm about to blow your mind, though, because in researching for this episode, I learned how much chocolate the average American consumes each year.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Do you have any idea? I had no idea.
I don't have any idea. This is not knowledge I just have in me. But I can guess. Let's see. So what, like a Hershey's chocolate bar is what, 2 ounces or something?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I don't know. So that's, oh my gosh, now I'm doing
math.
math.
Like you're doing math.
It's like an eighth of a pound or something. And then, so let's say someone eats one of this every week. And so I'm going to go for like 12 to 15 pounds.
Wow, you're pretty close, actually. Well done.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you must have excelled in math. It's around 11 pounds.
Oh, okay.
Per person per year.
Does that seem high to you?
I don't know. I'd never really thought about it. And the way that we tear through chocolate in our house, like, I know I'm above average in this way. And in this way only.
Above average. No, you're above average in every way. You exceed expectations, Jessica.
I mean, it was interesting. Thank you very much. In some meeting we had in the company, we were talking about, I think, just like how many baking supplies people buy a year, like how many bags of flour, how many bags of sugar, you know, how much chocolate. And I did realize that across the board, I'm above that. I was like, that's a year's worth? Like for me, that's like,
oh, I know,
a week. It's pretty wild because when you total up, you know, an average of 11 pounds, you know, per person, and you think about what that is, it adds up to about 2.8 billion pounds of chocolate every year.
That's a lot of chocolate. And actually, I would not have even imagined that we, meaning the planet, could produce that much chocolate.
It's a lot of chocolate.
I did my own research for this episode, and apparently chocolate sales peak every year, not on October 31st, like I would be a reasonable guess, but on November 1st, because that's when all that Halloween chocolate that we are so nostalgic for goes on sale.
All in all, the chocolate industry generates something like $128 billion. You know, it's a major economic driver. And I think there's a lot that goes into that. It's fun to talk about, and we will talk about the sort of the lighthearted side of chocolate. We'll talk about the things we like to bake with it, our favorite chocolate recipes, tips for working with chocolate, but also we're going a little deeper in this episode too.
Yes, and I'm so glad you talked to our special guest this episode, Amy Guittard, who is just an amazing resource on chocolate, both how to eat it, how to find the best. So I cannot wait for that conversation. But before we get there, let's talk more about Halloween candy. I do think, and I was raised to think this, and I'm going to tell you why in a second, that the more premium Halloween candy is chocolate. When I was a kid, like the houses that gave you chocolate candy versus, say, Jolly Ranchers or like a single lone Lifesaver or something, or some sort of Andes Mint, that was not, even though Andes Mint has chocolate, you know, those were not, those were like the lower tier for me. My mom had a system, which I am not condoning, but we lived in a small Ohio town that was big on Halloween, and lots of people dressed up in costumes, although some people do more with their costumes than others. And my mom really had strong feelings that you should go all out on Halloween, that if you're going to come and ask for candy, that you should be in a good costume.
Okay.
So she kept 2 bowls of candy on the porch. One was full of Jolly Ranchers, and one was full of like chocolate, like Snickers, Milky Ways, and that. Yeah. And as the kid came up the driveway, she silently judged the costume, and based on what she thought of it, she would either reach to the left, like you didn't do enough, you get a Jolly Rancher, or she went to the right and got like chocolate, and you know, congratulations. Of course, nobody knew that this. Nobody knew about the system. She kind of did it very like subtle behind. But of course, I knew, and I was like, oh my God.
Well, it's very in line with the unofficial Things Bakers Know motto, which is we judge but we don't listen. So your mom. And I kind of love it. I kind of love her like small power play.
Yeah. It was It's kind of savage, but it taught me from a very early age that chocolate is the premium.
I mean, I love so many things about chocolate, but there is this amazing versatility to chocolate. You know, there's everything from cocoa powder to cacao nibs, bittersweet chocolate, semi-sweet chocolate, milk chocolate, white chocolate, which is not really chocolate at all. Chocolate is a spectacular ingredient.
Yeah, but it's actually not always that easy to bake with. Like I say, there are some challenges specific to baking with chocolate. There's some trickiness that we're going to get into in our calls later.
I do have a favorite chocolate recipe.
I think a couple years ago, if you had asked me that, I would have given you something sort of complex, like a death by chocolate situation, or, you know, something that has a lot of components. I'm just like really in a simplicity phase in my life, and I just want a chocolate tart. I just think there is very little that can compete with a beautiful chocolate tart, really nicely well-baked butter crust, tart crust, chocolate ganache, maybe a very thin layer of caramel at the bottom.
Well, and it really highlights the quality of the chocolate, right? If you buy good quality chocolate and you're spending your money on that, like it's nice to be able to really taste that because, you know, as Amy talks about later in the podcast, like there is a lot of flavor variation, not only from brand to brand, but from type to type and season to season, which is really interesting. So it is nice to have a recipe where it's just, you know, showcases it. But, you know, well, I really, really, really like chocolate. You know, I'm just like one step away from getting one of those sweatshirts, you know, that has like the cursive script that says like, chocolate doesn't ask silly questions, chocolate understands, or something like that. I do love chocolate mousse. We have a great, very simple chocolate mousse recipe on the site. I made that, the last time I made that, I think I followed our recipe, but inspired by something I saw in Bon Appetit, I just made like a giant party bowl. It was New Year's Eve. And I made just an absolute vat of chocolate mousse. And I brought it to this party with freshly whipped cream, those Luxardo cherries, some good olive oil for drizzling, and some flaky salt, and set up like a little chocolate mousse bar. And let me just tell you, people lost their minds.
I'm sure they did, yeah.
I mean, for like, it's one of those, you know, low labor, high reward recipes, I think.
I love that you call that low labor. For a lot of our listeners, I think mousse is intimidating. Although you're right, it's not that hard and they can do it.
They could do it. And the nice thing about the recipe that our test kitchen director, Sarah, developed is that, it, you know, a lot of them are sort of fussier with like beaten egg whites, things like this. This is a very streamlined, very doable. You don't have to worry about like, am I going to eat raw eggs? Like, is my chocolate going to get all chippy and weird?
So so you're folding whipped cream into a chocolate base. Of a ganache?
Yes, exactly. Not a ganache, but yeah, just a melted chocolate base. And it is a delight. Just a delight. Nice. I like this sort of creamy chocolate things. Like I make chocolate pudding a lot. I use Liz Pruitt's recipe from the first tartine book, which I think is an unimpeachable recipe. And she introduced me to a very hot tip for pudding making. Those are a sentence I've never said before. But after you make this pudding, she advises that you blend it using an immersion blender for a full 5 minutes. Oh, and wow. I do what Liz says because she is a fantastic pastry chef, and it is so like light and silky and beautiful. So, and that also not too hard to make. And then, you know, like a brownie, hard to go wrong with a brownie.
It's very hard.
Well, I mean, there's so many things. Again, as usual, I feel like we could be talking forever. I want to make sure that we save time to hear this conversation that I had with Amy Guittard. So years ago, when I was still living in San Francisco, Amy invited me to take a tour of her family's chocolate company, Guittard, which I think makes some of the world's best chocolate and has been based in the Bay Area since the 1800s. It was so cool. It's not open to the public, so it felt like a very VIP experience. I got to see how chocolate chips were made. I got to see how cocoa powder was made, and I got to learn about every step of the chocolate making process. Totally fascinating, and as a chocolate lover like myself, very illuminating. It's run by her father, Gary Guittard. She works there with her brother, Jesse, so it is still a family-run business, and she is just an absolute font of knowledge, and I was so glad that she took the time to chat with us. So I was saying that before we came on to record this episode, I did what I do most afternoons around 2 or 3 o'clock, which is go to my pantry, root around in a bag of Guittard wafers, pull out a handful. Sometimes I dip them in peanut butter and then carry on with the rest of my afternoon.
Oh,
So
yeah.
thank you for that. Thank you
You're
for
so
sponsoring my afternoon
welcome.
snack.
You're so welcome. I call that chocolate hour, although here my chocolate hour is like 10 a.m. and then maybe at like 1 and then another one at
Yeah.
3. Also, almond butter, side note, almond butter, a date, and like a little bit of chocolate is also delicious.
Yeah, that
You haven't
sounds
tried
very
that.
good. That's an upgrade. So the company Guittard was founded by your great grandfather, and he came to the United States, to San Francisco from France, and he was in search of gold,
Yes.
but ended up making chocolate. Which is
Yes.
kind of like maybe more valuable to me than gold. I don't know. I mean, I know gold futures are going up every
Arguable.
day, but
Yeah, so he brought chocolate to trade for mining supplies. So when he got to San Francisco, he realized that the merchants selling goods to all the gold miners were doing pretty darn well. And so he went back to France. His uncle had a chocolate factory. Actually, my family history in France was of stonemasonry, and chocolate making is a grinding business, more or less. So over the course of making chocolate, you're refining the particle size over and over again. You know, after you roast your beans, you're going to mill them, and then you're going to refine them, and all those processes, even thereafter, is a process of making the chocolate finer and finer and creating flavor. And so the history of stonemasonry sort of aligned really nicely with chocolate making. So his uncle had a chocolate factory in France. He learned how to make chocolate from his uncle and brought that machinery back to San Francisco, which is like it still baffles me that he came here and then went back to Europe and then came back to San Francisco. Again, at the time, you couldn't subsist on making and selling one thing. So chocolate was one item that we made and sold, but we also sold coffees, teas, and spices. So anything that you could grind, basically.
I mean, we could spend hours and hours talking about this, but can you give me the nickel version of how chocolate is made? So from like
the
bean to
nickel
bar,
version.
I mean,
Sure.
start.
I'll try to do it in like record time.
Yep.
So cocoa grows 10 to 15 degrees, more or less, either side of the equator. We partner with a lot of farmers to make sure that they are cultivating, fermenting, drying properly to get the most flavor out of those beans. And that partnership is really important because the flavor starts at the farm. So when you harvest the cocoa pod, you take the pod, you open the pod, there's seeds inside, there's a pulp around the seed, and that's what's used in the fermentation, which is a really important flavor development process. And so you take the seeds out of the pod. Different countries will ferment different ways. There's cascading boxes. So there's typically 3 boxes, and you ferment them over a period of time. They'll start in one box, you open it up, and you aerate the box. The beans sort of like fold in on themselves. They typically have banana leaves on top to keep the heat inside to help with the fermentation. And so that's one way of doing it. Then once it's fermented, they need to get dried. Solar drying is the best way. Some people do artificial drying, but artificial drying can, much like when you have your chocolate bar in a pantry, if it's not stored properly, if the bag is left open or a bar is left exposed, it'll start to take on the smell of your pantry, which is why chocolate storage is so important. Similarly, the beans will take up any flavor that is around them. So sometimes you'll see beans being dried on the ground, and that can impart an off flavor. And so it's really important to try to dry the beans on a raised drying mat, oftentimes in the sun. The weather might not be as cooperative. Some countries will have to dry near fire, which will sometimes impart a smoky flavor, which is not good. So there's, again, all these things that are really, really important for flavor development, even before we get the beans.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we can kind of forget when we're eating a candy bar or chocolate bar that it is an agricultural product, right? And that it is variable in that way. Like it's variable, to weather, it's variable to all of these, sort of decisions, big and small, along the process of harvesting, fermenting.
Absolutely. It's a really important thing to remember. That transformation that goes from bean to bar, we kind of colloquially reference that. Bean to bar really is a reminder that it is an agricultural product.
And like coffee beans, then you get these fermented, dried cocoa beans sent to you in the States, at which point you then roast, grind, sweeten, process, etc.
There you go. You did the process.
See how fast I made that? We spent 45 minutes talking about fermentation, and the rest can be condensed in. No, but I think your description of the sort of like the idea of the stone mason, the stone milling is really interesting because you sort of get, and I saw it in the factory, like you see it go from this sort of like chunky matrix to something that becomes smoother and smoother and smoother.
Yeah. In the process of making chocolate, once you grind your nibs or your cocoa beans, cacao is more or less 50% fat and 50% mass. When you grind peanuts, you get peanut butter. When you grind cocoa beans or nibs, you get unsweetened chocolate, which is the base of a lot of recipes. And that is mass and fat. If you take that unsweetened chocolate or chocolate liquor and put it in a cocoa press, that's how you get cocoa powder.
Oh, yeah. Can you tell our listeners, I think one of the questions that, beginner bakers or even maybe more seasoned bakers have is like they see that percentage on the bags. I mean, people come to us and they see the percentage on our flour bags and are like, what does that mean? Obviously, the percentage on a flour bag means something very different from what it means on a bag of chips or wafers or bars. So when we see 64%, 72%, what does that number refer to?
Yeah, so that is the percent cacao, which is mass and butter. And so I think it's important. A lot of people say, well, a higher percentage means it's more intense. That could be true. It might, you could have a 70% cacao that has no added cocoa butter in it. That's going to taste pretty intense. You could also have a 70% cacao that has 65% mass and 5% added butter. That's going to taste less intense than a 70%. You could have an 80% that is 10% added butter and a 70% mass, and that's going to taste, so the level of intensity adjusts based on the amount of cocoa butter.
I want to talk just for a second about like, what is it that separates like truly sort of cheap chocolate from more high quality chocolate? Is it the amount of cocoa mass? Is it the quality of the ingredients? Is it all of those things?
So I think you raise a really important point about good chocolate. And I think to go back to what you were saying earlier, I always encourage people to taste. I think, a couple things. Grind is really important. Grind is sort of the mouthfeel. It's particle size. And so something that is smoother, I think that's a really easy litmus for someone to pick up on. That indicates sort of a longer, slower process, if you will. It also, I mentioned earlier, chocolate is a grinding business and it's flavor development. When you have smaller particles, the cocoa butter is coating, more surface area. So, I think that there's a lot that goes into particle size and particle size distribution. It also affects performance and how something will flow, particularly if you're coating something.
I think the thing that's on a lot of people's minds right now is the price of chocolate, because the price of chocolate and of cocoa has gone up. And so chocolate prices have gone up for everyone. And why is that? Is that like a climate thing? Is it a crop failure thing? Is it tariffs? Is it something else entirely?
It is all of the above, but I can circle back to that. So the cocoa market has sort of shot through the roof. A little over a year ago, cocoa was being traded at like more or less $3,000 a metric ton. Now it's at like $8,000 a metric ton.
Wow.
So the cost of the raw materials themselves are increasing, mostly due to shortages that have resulted from climate change. Climate change being wetter environments that create a really lovely breeding ground for diseases that impacted the crop. And cocoa has two primary seasons. There's main crop and mid crop. So we're kind of always waiting to see sort of what the results will be from each of those periods to see if there's any indication of some improvement. And so what you're seeing now in terms of the rising costs, we're seeing rising costs across all facets of our life.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so with cocoa, there's not just the rising costs that we see day to day, but it's also a real tangible impact based on the shortages that we're seeing in the market.
And I will say, I, as somebody that does all the grocery shopping in my house and also is a huge chocolate consumer, like it's noticeable, right? Like a bag of chocolate chips that was once $6 is now $9.
And one of those things that like we struggle with, which is the reality of cocoa farmers, like we pay a premium for our, our cocoa beans, flavor beans and all that stuff. And the reality is there should be an increase in price. Cocoa farmers don't make enough money for the material that they're cultivating and the time and the effort. And it's sort of course correcting, something that has been long discussed, and the need for a higher price for this raw material. Like, what can we do to help communicate that?
Boy, I feel like we've only scratched the surface, but
We have. But it's so lovely to see you.
it's so lovely to see you. And thank you for all this information. Amy Guittard, we appreciate you. Thank you so much for coming on Things Bakers Know and telling us what you know.
We appreciate you. We love King Arthur.
This episode is brought to you by all the chocolate that we sell on KingArthurBaking.com. Obviously, King Arthur is known for flour, but we also sell all kinds of baking ingredients. And I think our chocolate and cocoa selection is secretly one of the best things we offer. We have everything you need, from milk to semi-sweet to bittersweet chocolate, all from top chocolate makers like Guittard and Calabo.
I love all of our chocolate. I also love our huge selection of cocoa. And one personal favorite is our black cocoa, which imparts this ultra dark, deep chocolate flavor and truly inky dark chocolate color that simply can't be replicated. It is the ingredient you need if you want to make your own version of the famous chocolate sandwich cookies at home.
Find it and all of our chocolate and cocoa powder at KingArthurBaking.com. It's time for our next segment, Ask the Bakers. For Ask the Bakers, we want to hear from you. If you have a baking question for us, head to KingArthurBaking.com/podcast to record a voice message, and we may end up using it on the show. That's KingArthurBaking.com/podcast.
If you have a baking question that simply cannot wait, you can always reach out to our Bakers Hotline via phone, email, or online chat. Just go to KingArthurBaking.com/bakers-hotline. That's KingArthurBaking.com/bakers-hotline, or call us 855-371-2253. That's 2253 as in bake. Let's hear our questions.
I have to buy more cocoa powder and notice there's 3 different types that King Arthur sells. Can you explain to me how they're different and how to choose one over the other? Thank you.
This is a great question. And,
It's tricky.
It's really tricky. And a few years ago, we had legendary pastry chef Alice Medrick write a whole blog for us explaining the different types of cocoa and how they're used. And she is a fabulous resource for all things chocolate. And so we actually sell more than 3 different types of cocoa powder, but for the purpose of answering this question in a relatively concise way for a change,
Let's see if you can do it.
I think we're going to focus on the 3 main types of cocoa, which are natural cocoa, Dutch processed cocoa, and black cocoa. So if you leave it like that in its untreated form, you have natural cocoa. And natural cocoa tends to be fruitier in flavor than Dutch processed cocoa, and often a little lighter in color. Now, Dutch processed cocoa powder is cocoa powder that has been alkalized. So it gets treated with potassium carbonate, which reduces the acidity in the cocoa. And it deepens the color of the cocoa. It sometimes turns it almost a reddish color. And I would say flavor-wise, to me, it has a deeper chocolate flavor. I think it's less sort of fruity than natural cocoa powder. And it's important, some recipes will specify Dutch processed cocoa, some will specify natural cocoa, some will say you can use either. And what's important to know here is that any cake, cookie, or baked good that's leavened only with baking soda, or a combination of soda and powder where baking soda is predominant, requires you to use natural cocoa powder, because otherwise your baked good will not rise properly. But recipes that require you to use Dutch processed cocoa to rise well and also to taste good are recipes that only use baking powder as their leavener. So if it's a recipe that calls for baking powder and cocoa, you want to use a Dutch processed cocoa. If it's a recipe that is leavened mostly with baking soda, you want to use a natural cocoa. And the recipe should specify if it matters. Some recipes, it doesn't matter. But if it does for rise, gosh, I hope that the recipe developer has told you which one to use. And then the third, and I would say perhaps slightly fringier cocoa, because you don't see it everywhere. I think it's something you get, at specialty shops. We sell it online, is black cocoa. So black cocoa has been alkalized later in the processing and treated with a higher dose of the potassium carbonate. And it turns the cocoa like truly inky black color. And it gives you that flavor, which I feel like is best described as the Oreo cookie flavor. And black cocoa will work with either baking soda or baking powder.
I love having black cocoa in my pantry. I think it's such a fun ingredient to work with. I wouldn't throw it into, recipes that don't necessarily call for it. One, just because it's going to make
intense.
your baked goods very dark in color.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can look a little off-putting. But I love working with recipes that do call for it because it's just so fun and it is a completely different flavor.
Yeah. So I hope that helps. And, stock up because it's definitely cocoa season. Let's listen to our next question.
Hey, King Arthur. How do I get a shiny, crackly crust on top of my brownies? Like a box mix.
This is a question that so many people have, and we have written a lot about this on our blog. And in fact, one author in particular, PJ Hamill, has gone really deep, and we do have a few tips. I'm going to give you a little bit of science. Don't ask me too much because I don't fully understand it. But basically, this is about melting the sugar, and because that crackly top is sugar that has, during the baking process, migrated to the top of the brownies and crystallized there to form a shiny sheen. So what you want to do is dissolve that sugar and even melt it, because dissolving the sugar helps it migrate to the top. It helps separate it from the other ingredients and get it to the top. Some brownie recipes have you heat the butter and the sugar on the stovetop and even bring it to a simmer or a little boil, and that really dissolves the sugar and gets it going. And I find that recipes that include that step always give you that shiny top, that crackly top. I like that. And that also kind of gives you a chewier brownie too, because it's dissolving some of the water. You could try incorporating that step into your favorite brownie recipe, I guess, and you could see what happens. But probably safer to find a recipe, which we will leave a few in the show notes, that involve that step.
Those are great too, because often those are like a one bowl situation. They have you melting the sugar and the butter and then just like adding everything else to it.
Oh, yeah, right. You just throw it all in the skillet. Yeah, that's a good point. There's one other thing, though. There's sort of a very simple step really incorporated into any brownie recipe that PJ discovered: adding chocolate chips. Now, not everybody is a chocolate chip in brownie person. However, PJ found that when you throw chocolate chips into the batter at the end and then bake that brownie, that almost always gives you that shiny top. So that's a tip you can use in almost any brownie recipe. She's tested it so much and it always works. But she has a theory. Her theory is that when you throw some chocolate chips into the batter at the last minute, it just introduces just that much more additional sugar to the recipe, which then, dissolves, floats to the top of the crust. She's saying it's just that little added bit of sugar that helps the crust form.
Interesting. Yeah, I buy what PJ's selling. And I never mind a brownie with chocolate chips added. So for me, it's a win-win. Crackly top and extra chocolate.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I just feel like what I need to do when we finish recording this is go make some brownies.
Yeah. What we really need to do is go plan our brownie episode.
Yeah,
kind of crazy that we have not done that yet.
Season 3, brownies. I can't wait. Let's hear our next question.
My friend was telling me that they tempered their chocolate, and I admittedly didn't know what that meant. So what does it mean to temper chocolate, and should I be doing it?
I will say that I have tempered chocolate before. I do find it quite tricky. I know there were more advanced ways to do it and that there are simpler ways.
Well, and I think what we could say is I feel confident answering that second part, like, should I be doing it? So tempering chocolate is a way to ensure that your chocolate stays shiny and snappy once it sets. So you melt your chocolate using a very specific protocol, which is, I don't want to talk about. I'm going to phone a friend on this one. But the reason is, like, say you were covering a truffle or something like that, and you wanted like that chocolate shop quality finish where it stays really shiny, it stays really snappy, it doesn't bloom. Then you would want to temper your chocolate. And it is a little bit fussy.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you're answering the question, should I be doing it? Because I would argue that if you are doing something like dipping cookies in the chocolate, you could temper that chocolate and it could be like really beautiful, and maybe your recipe calls for that. But you can also get away with just dipping it into melted chocolate and letting it set. And it will not be as beautiful. It will not be as snappy, but it will set. And for me, it's going to be good enough.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've lived my whole life never tempering chocolate, at least never tempering chocolate for recreation.
Yeah.
So I felt like I should reach out to somebody in the company that had some more expertise. So our colleague Melanie Wanders used to actually own a chocolate company outside of Washington, D.C. with her husband, Wilhelm, who also is a King Arthur employee owner. And I knew that Mel would be the right person to answer this question thoroughly and accurately because she has so much chocolate experience. So we used the phone a friend option, as we often do. And Melanie Wanders, who works now in our R&D department, came to our aid.
Hi, baking friends. It's Mel from the Research and Development team here at King Arthur. Tempering chocolate is the process of melting the chocolate to a certain temperature, cooling it to a certain temperature with some agitation or stirring in between, then holding it at that temperature to dip baked goods or dried fruit, or to enrobe or coat chocolate truffles in candies. Without jumping too far off the science deep end, here's what's happening when we temper chocolate. As we just learned, real chocolate contains cocoa butter. This cocoa butter is made up of beta crystals that set or harden at different temperatures. To ensure our chocolate stays shiny and snappy once it sets, we have to melt all of those crystals first, then slowly cool the chocolate down while stirring to start setting some, but not all of those crystals. Once we've dipped or coated our items in chocolate, we allow them to set at room temperature for 3 to 5 minutes for those remaining beta crystals to set. And what we're left with is a beautifully glossy chocolate-dipped item that has a snappy break when you bite into it and stays solid at room temperature. While tempering can seem intimidating, just think of it as a temperature game. You're going to melt the chocolate to a certain temperature, then cool it to a certain temperature, and then keep it at that certain temperature while you work with the chocolate. That temperature varies based on the type of chocolate you're using. For dark chocolate, you'll melt it to 122 degrees Fahrenheit, cool it to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and maintain it at a temperature of 86 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit while you work with it. For milk or white chocolate, you'll melt the chocolate to 105 degrees Fahrenheit, cool it to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and then hold it at a working temperature between 84 and 86 degrees Fahrenheit. As with anything, practice always makes better. Be patient and kind with yourself. It took me years to feel confident tempering chocolate. And in the end, even out-of-temper chocolate that is streaky and less snappy still tastes great. So you can eat the mistakes and no one will ever know.
Well, I never like to be patient or kind with myself, but I think Mel's advice is sound.
She doesn't know what she's doing.
She does know what she's doing. And I think, truly, this is something that all bakers can kind of take to heart. Like, you may not nail it the first time, but, with practice, your skills improve and you can eat the mistakes.
Exactly. The worst that can happen is that you end up with semi-tempered chocolate.
Yeah.
Which you just eat.
You just eat.
Every episode, we like to check in with Jessica to see what wildly surprising and full-throated ideas are in her head, a segment we lovingly call Jess-opinions. Jessica, what is your chocolate Jess-opinion?
I hate white chocolate. I think it's disgusting.
Thanks for listening. You can please rate and review. Okay, you're not the only one who thinks this, but I need you to go a little deeper. Explain why.
Well, okay. So white chocolate, for listeners who don't know about the processing, it is cocoa butter, sugar, milk solids, but there's none of the part of the cacao that I think actually gives chocolate its personality, that gives it its like dynamic and interesting flavor. To me, white chocolate is just like one note sweetness. And I think lesser quality white chocolate is sort of both flavorless and unpleasantly greasy. Like the mouthfeel of it when it melts is not to my taste. And even, I think by law, I say, as though I know all the laws of chocolate, has to have 20% cocoa butter at minimum. And I think there's a lot of outfits out there that are just like greasing it on the minimum, so.
Which then makes you wonder, what is the rest?
Yeah, well, the rest is sugar and milk,
Yeah.
right? And so I just don't think it's very interesting. And I know you can caramelize your white chocolate. I know you can pair it with macadamia nuts. I just always think when I eat white chocolate, would this be better if it were milk chocolate or semi-sweet chocolate or bittersweet chocolate? And my answer is always yes. There's nothing that white chocolate can do that dark chocolate or milk chocolate cannot do better. There.
I think this is really a branding issue. I think white chocolate has a big branding problem in the fact that it has chocolate in the name. But if it was called something else, I don't think people would have such a problem with it. It's the expectations that we bring to anything that has the word chocolate in it that makes white chocolate seem to fall short. But I don't mind white chocolate. I know this is not my segment to tell my opinion, but I just got to counter you for a second. If it were called something like
Oh, I love your rebranding here. I can't wait to hear what you come up with.
Butter bits. Cocoa butter bits.
Butter bits is not... Actually, you know, I will say I have had white chocolate all across the quality spectrum. You know, everything from like drugstore white chocolate to premium brand white chocolate. Obviously, there is a difference between those.
And you've eaten those just out of pure hate? You're like, I hate this so much, I got to try it?
Well, you know... people's tastes change all the time, right? Like maybe I'm going to have an evolution.
Yeah.
And obviously, you know, there is a big difference between cheap white chocolate and more premium white chocolate. But I think really the flavor that it's bringing is, especially when you get to the higher quality ones, is vanilla. It's like a milky vanilla. So maybe it's milky vanilla bars. I don't know. But I think that is sort of like the...
vanilla chips or vanilla... Yeah, vanilla... Milky vanilla bars. Okay.
I mean, we'll workshop it.
Shoot us a note, listeners, and let us know. Would you buy milky vanilla bars?
And I am not here to like yuck anyone else's yum, but you know, you asked for my opinion.
Well, let's go from yuck to yum. What are you baking this week?
Oh, so this week I am going savory, and I'm going to make... I started a little too soon. I'm going to admit, like it got a tiny bit cold out. And
yes.
I went hard, like bean soup, ribollita.
Me too.
So I've been making a lot of soups, and now it feels appropriate. But the way to upgrade any soup, even like canned soup, is our jalapeno cheddar pull-apart bread. Woo! This recipe developed by our colleague Martin Phillip. So good. It's just like packed with cheddar, packed with jalapenos. It's not hard to shape, and it just gives you this like beautiful bronzed loaf, kind of a tear and share situation. And you know, sometimes I buy the soup and make the bread. Sometimes I make the soup and buy the bread. But I feel like this bread's like a real upgrade on a soup dinner. So that's what I'm going to bake.
It's delicious. I love that bread.
Yeah. What are you going to bake?
Well, I'm also in like sort of hearty, carby, cheesy space, just like you. And I'm going to try finally the fugazzetta on our site, which is
nice.
A recipe that David D.T. Turner in our test kitchen developed. It's an Argentinian style, it's basically pizza, but it's a stuffed crust, and it has all the cheese is sort of like stuffed in between two layers of crust, and there's just a pile of cooked onions on top, and I just love cooked onions. And so it's kind of like, it's giving me French onion soup in pizza form.
Yeah, actually, I love that.
Which actually is the recipe we have in the pizza book coming out, a true French onion pizza. So this is sort of a different take on that. And I'm just sort of fascinated by Argentinian pizza because, you know, there are so many Italians that immigrated to Argentina a while ago. And now Argentina has this like very distinctive style of pizza. And this is one example of it that I'm interested to try.
Sounds like we should go on a field trip to learn more.
Yeah.
First we'll go to chocolate school, then we'll go to Argentine pizza and mortazza school, you know, mortadella sandwich. Yeah.
I'm writing the email to our boss, Bill, right now.
All caps. People love that. Thanks as ever for tuning in and joining us here on Things Bakers Know.
Remember to like and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
And leave us a review while you're there, or share this episode with a friend.
And in the meantime, people, don't forget, follow the recipe. Things Bakers Know is hosted and executive produced by me, David Tamarkin.
And me, Jessica Badalana.
Rossi Anastapoulo is our senior producer. Chad Chennai is our producer. And Marcus Bagala is our engineer. Original music by Megan and Marcus Bagala.
This episode featured Amy Guittard, Chief Marketing Officer at Guittard Chocolate, and the great-great-great-granddaughter of Guittard's founder. You can learn more at guittard.com, GUITTARD.com.
Things Bakers Know is a King Arthur Baking Company podcast.